You know I'm right. Nick Durst here with Joe Calabrese. And Joe, we have broadcasting royalty on the show today. The only person I know that does all four major sports plus the Olympics, and is just an incredible broadcaster. We're excited to have him on with us today.
Absolutely incredible broadcaster, and you're totally 100% right. Comes from royalty. He is the radio voice for our New York Rangers. Somebody we're very, very excited to have on. The son of the great Marv Albert, Mr. Kenny Albert. Kenny, welcome to the show. Nice to see you. Hope everything is great. I hope you had a very Merry Christmas. How are you doing today?
It's great to be with you guys. Thanks for the very kind introduction. I've heard a lot about your show, and hopefully both of you and all of your listeners and viewers are healthy and staying safe, and Happy New Year to everybody. Thanks again for having me on.
Appreciate it. So Kenny, we'll get right back into it. Usually I ask people, when did they know they wanted to pursue a career in broadcasting or sports? You were just born into it. So you're probably doing broadcasts in your house at the age of 6 or something, but tell us a little bit about your childhood and how you ended up becoming the statistician for the Rangers at the age of 14.
Well, you're exactly right. I did grow up around it, obviously, with my father and my two uncles, Al and Steve, as well, who were play-by-play announcers for a long time. And I was right around 6 when I started doing play-by-play. My parents gave me a tape recorder for my birthday, 5th or 6th birthday. And I set up my bedroom like a TV or radio studio. I had the desk and then the bed in the middle and the TV on the other side. And I would call games off the television into the tape recorder. And it's really all that I ever wanted to do. Did some writing in high school and college as well for the town newspaper and the school newspapers, but play-by-play was always my dream as a youngster. And I would start to bring the tape recorder to actual games in my teenage years, to Madison Square Garden, Shea Stadium, for example. But a huge break when I was 15, and there's a Staten Island tie-in to this. I went to high school on Long Island in Port Washington, and I covered the games, like I said, for the school paper. I was the backup public address announcer to one of the teachers. And when I was 15, a small cable station showed up at my high school, Cox Cable of Great Neck, one of the neighboring towns. And they were going to film a girls' basketball game. They had 2 cameras, no announcers. And I was introduced to the producer, a gentleman by the name of Roy Menton, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago. And he hired me to announce the game. I volunteered. He clipped a microphone onto my shirt, and I did play-by-play of the high school girls basketball game that day. And I met with Roy after the game, and I said, look, if you have any other games down the line, I'd love to be a part of it. And it was the best experience that I could have ever received, because other kids at the time, these days, there are broadcasting camps and schools, and so many of the high schools and colleges have programs where kids could get started at a pretty young age. Back then, that wasn't the case. You couldn't really do play-by-play until college. So for the next 3 years in high school, I would travel all over Long Island calling basketball, baseball, hockey, football, lacrosse, soccer, you name it. I would bring friends along as my color analyst. Obviously, we weren't getting paid, but I didn't care. Just getting the experience was unbelievable. And then Roy Menton happened to take a job running Staten Island cable in the late 80s when I went off to college at NYU. So around 87, 88, 89, when Roy moved to Staten Island, he hired me to do some Wagner college football games. And I probably worked about, I would say around 10 Wagner games over the 3-year period. And those were the last football games that I worked before I was hired by Fox to do NFL games in 1994.
Wow.
So when I went out to do a Rams-Cardinals game in 94, it was my first football game doing play-by-play since a Wagner College game back in 1989, 5 years earlier.
That's amazing. Wagner College, they occasionally get some pros from the football
and back
program.
then they had a great team. They I think they won a Division III championship, the Amos Alonzo Stag Bowl, one of those years. We didn't do the playoff games, but they had a really good team back then. Walt Hamline, the longtime coach, is still the athletic director at Wagner. So great memories of traveling to Staten Island for those games back in the 80s.
Yeah, Wagner College, beautiful facility, and that's a great story that you made. Your last game before the NFL was Wagner College, so
last football game.
Yeah,
that's pretty cool. You mentioned NYU. What did you study there, and is it true that you and Rich Ackerman were roommates?
We were. You guys have
Wow.
done your research. Not only were we roommates in college, we went to summer camp together. That's where we first met, at Kutcher Sports Academy up in Monticello, New York. The basketball coach there was Evan Pickman, who was a longtime head coach at the College of Staten Island and a good friend, and was the general manager of the Staten Island Stallions of the U.S. Basketball League back in '86 and '87, and I did some work for them as well. So a lot of days and nights on Staten Island, but I did go to NYU, and we had a great Division III basketball program, men's and women's, and about 5 or 6 of us who worked at the radio station, including Rich. We got to call so many of the games. We would rotate play-by-play, color analyst, producer, engineer, statistician. So it was really a terrific experience doing it at the D3 level and getting the reps, and study journalism and communications there. And one of the benefits to going to school in New York was being involved with some internships and some work at some other radio stations as well. I was hired to do some backup work with the New York Islanders on their pre and post game shows, and actually was hired to do a couple of games my senior year in college back in '89, '90. And I was able to use that tape to land a job in the American Hockey League with the Baltimore Skipjacks, where I worked for 2 years. So great memories at NYU, and of my trips to Staten Island as well, with both the Staten Island Stallions and doing the Wagner College games.
Yeah, now Rich Ackerman, he was ahead of the curve as far as sanitizing, because I used to intern at WFAN. This guy would just be wiping everything down in Lysol wipes, and I thought it was the best thing because it made so much sense that everyone was sharing these desks, and he was just wiping everything down. So
he was about 20 years ahead of his time. He really was.
Absolutely.
But the funny thing is, and we joke about it, when we were in college, that wasn't necessarily the case. He was probably the messenger of the two of us. But as he says, when it's his own stuff, he doesn't care. He just doesn't want everybody else's germs.
No doubt about it. So, so the Baltimore Skipjacks, you go down there and to Baltimore, and you from there are able to stay in the area and start working with the Washington Capitals, doing play-by-play for them on NBC Sports Washington. How did that opportunity come about? And, how important was it for you to just get those reps for 2 years doing hockey on a daily or a nightly basis?
Yeah, it was unbelievable. Those 2 years, when I look back with the Baltimore Skipjacks, I wouldn't trade it in for anything. I was hired by the team as the radio broadcaster, but there were so many other duties as well at that level: public relations, statistics, marketing, helping to sell tickets, group sales. I wasn't exactly the best salesman in the world. I think I made 3 sales my first summer. One was to a sports bar, one was to a batting cage, driving range facility, and the other one was to a hotel gym. And we would throw in everything. For $500. They would get season tickets, they would get commercials on the radio, they would get player appearances at their establishments. So that wasn't exactly my forte, but it was great as far as the learning experience, being involved in so many different facets of a pro sports organization. And most of the players on the team were around the same age as me. I was 22 when I was hired, and we had a lot in common at the time. We were all trying to get to the next level, myself as a broadcaster, and the players looking to make the jump from the American Hockey League to the NHL. And we had a number of players from that team go on to terrific NHL careers. Our assistant coach and my road roommate for 2 years was Barry Trotz, the current coach of the Islanders. To save money at the minor league level, they stuck the assistant coach with the radio guy. So we roomed together for 2 years on the road. During my first season in Baltimore, one of our defensemen, who was at the end of an NHL career and was acquired by Washington as a depth player and was sent down for about 40 games that year, was Joel Quenneville, who's gone on to win 3 Stanley Cups as head coach of the Chicago Blackhawks. So terrific memories in Baltimore. Some of the 6 and 8 and 10-hour bus rides, I still remember well to this day. Our longest trip on the bus was up to Portland, Maine from Baltimore, which was 10 hours. But an unbelievable experience, getting those reps, 160 games over 2 seasons, calling the radio, sometimes with a partner in the booth with me and sometimes solo. And from there, as Nick mentioned, I made some connections in Washington and with the Capitals organization. I was hired by Home Team Sports at the time, which is now NBC Washington, worked their home games for 3 years. It was a split television package. So Craig Laughlin and I did the home games for 3 seasons. And to me, getting out of the New York area, my home area, establishing my own identity for 5 years was really an incredible experience. Getting to do it in some terrific cities like Baltimore and Washington. I really enjoyed living down there. And then an opportunity presented itself in '95 when Howie Rose moved over to Sports Channel to work Islanders and Mets TV. And I wound up getting hired by MSG Network to call the Rangers games on the radio. And here we are 25 years later and still with MSG, and do some Knicks games on the TV side as well. And have had 3 great partners in Sal Messina, a Hall of Famer, and then Brian Mullen, who is a terrific player, and now Dave Maloney for the last 15 years. So it's been an incredible run, and hard to believe it's 25 years.
Wild. What was it like when you first come in right after the Stanley Cup? Howie has one of the all-time most memorable calls of all time.
Yep.
Any trepidations there? Like, hey, I got some big shoes to fill. This team's really good. The Capitals, when you're with them, they weren't the greatest, and now you're coming right to the Stanley Cup champion. So what was that transition like?
Right. I actually came a year and a half later. So they won the Cup in '94, and I called that series on the radio for NHL radio. So I was out all 7 of those games. It was so exciting to call the Rangers Canucks series, although I wasn't working in New York at the time. Then they played what would have been the '94-'95 season, the lockout year. It didn't start until January '95. They played a 48-game season, lost in the second round that year to the Flyers. That was my last year in Washington. So I actually came in the summer of '95 for the '95-'96 season. So it was about a year and a half after they won the Cup, but still a great team, tremendous team. And they added Wayne Gretzky 2 years later, went to the conference final with Gretzky and Messier in '97. And I was part of that run on the radio side. Didn't really feel any trepidation because I had worked in the league for 3 years and I'd been doing hockey for 5 years. And yes, certainly big shoes to fill, but I was confident in the job that I could do at the time. But it was actually a tough decision at the time for me because I felt like I was letting the people down in Washington who had hired me. They gave me an opportunity at the age of 24 to do NHL hockey, and I was filling in on NBA and Major League Baseball games for them as well. But it was the right move, obviously, and here we are 25 years later to do radio for the Rangers, one of the great organizations in all of sports, and a team that I grew up watching and going to games for my entire childhood, and just an honor and so proud to be a part of the organization with the Rangers and MSG Network. And we had those good early years. Like I said, they went to the conference final in '97 with the Gretzky-Messier combination, lost to the Flyers. Then the 7-year period out of the playoffs, and then the incredible run beginning in '05-06 with Henrik Lundqvist coming in as a rookie, and that was Dave Maloney's first year on the radio, coincided with Lundqvist's debut, and went to the playoffs 11 of those next 12 years, never played a meaningless game because the only year they missed was in the shootout in game 82 in Philadelphia in 2010. The incredible run, 3 trips to the conference final, the Stanley Cup final run in 2014. So just a great era to be a part of New York Rangers hockey.
Yeah, you grew up watching the Rangers as a huge fan, and we know you're a huge Giants fan too. We've got our connection, so we know that about you.
Well, growing up, Giants and Jets. I actually rooted for both teams. Living on Long Island, I went to Jets games at Shea Stadium, but they didn't play each other very often. So as a youngster, I was a Giants and a Jets fan. I watched every game both teams played. So I can't dismiss the Jets as well.
Okay, well that's totally fair. I'm a Jets fan. Nick's a Giants fan. I'm a Yankees fan. Nick's a Mets fan. I think we balance each other out pretty well, for the most part.
And I, as you guys probably know, I've had the opportunity to call a number of big games involving the Giants through the years. The other day was the anniversary of the Victor Cruz 99-yard catch.
Yes.
Sorry, Joe, against the Jets.
That's one of my most famous favorite calls of yours of all time. I mean,
the Giants to the Super Bowl.
That was a game that helped springboard them to the Super Bowl that year. Yeah. So,
and then I put the Jets where they are today.
And actually, just to balance it out, Joe, last year I called the Giants-Jets game, and the memorable play in that one was Jamal Adams stripping the ball from Daniel Jones and scoring a touchdown. So there've been some memorable plays on both sides in games involving the Giants and Jets.
Absolutely. So I want to go. We'll go back to the '90s. We'll talk you through the rest of everything very shortly. From a fan's perspective, I need to know, and I need to ask this. the Rangers, they went for it in 94. They won. When you go for it and you win, that's it. No questions asked. But the fan in you, right? And I have to ask, how much did it hurt inside knowing that the Rangers missed out on the opportunity to have the opportunity to watch Sergei Zubov and Tony Amonte and those guys play throughout their primes?
I think, when you wind up winning the championship,
it doesn't matter. No, I totally agree.
Thing, right?
But there's also that little creeping doubt.
They did trade
what if they just kept it together?
Right. They traded a lot of young players, Tony Amonte, Doug Waite. They wound up trading Sergei Zubov. That was actually right around the time I was hired. They made that trade with Pittsburgh. It was Zubov and Nedved for Ulf Samuelsson and Luc Robitaille. And they also traded Matthias Norstrom, a young defenseman, away to the Kings when they acquired Marty McSorley and Shane Churla and Yari Curry in 96 when they were looking to make another long run. But I think when you look back, to what Neil Smith and Mike Keenan did in 94, all the trades, you felt bad for a guy like Mike Gartner, who had never won a cup in his career and gets traded away at the deadline, and his team goes on to win the cup. But the guy that got back, Glenn Anderson, was such a big part of the playoff run as well. But, I don't think you can erase, you can't criticize what they did because they wound up winning. It's like hearing Bill Belichick on Monday Night Football last night. They ran back a soundbite from, I think it was just prior to the season, when he was asked about Tom Brady leaving and bringing in Cam Newton at a pretty low salary and kind of rebuilding. And he said, look, in the last 5 years, we made a lot of moves, and maybe it will cost us in the future, this season and in the future, but we won 3 Super Bowls and got to another one and got to an AFC Championship game. See, I think if you ask any Ranger fan in February of 94, if you sat them down and said, we're going to trade Doug Waite and Tony Amonte and Todd Marchand, and then eventually Sergei Zubov and Matthias Norstrom and others, but you'll win the cup for the first time in 54 years. I think 100% everyone would sign on the dotted line for that.
Yeah, I think the only regret of the 90s has to be Messier signing with the Canucks, because we didn't get to see him and Gretzky play together enough, and who knows what could have been. But other than that, you can't complain if you're a Rangers fan.
Right. And then he wound up coming back. But that 1 year was so much fun watching the two of them together, and they beat the Devils in the second round, beat Florida in the first round, and then wound up beating the Devils in the second round on the Adam Graves overtime goal, which is similar to the Matteau goal, coming around from behind the net on Brodeur.
Right.
And then they had, the Flyers were a really good team. They had Lindros, Leclerc, the Legion of Doom, depth throughout their lineup. But the Rangers also had a lot of injuries. So I would have liked to have seen what they might have been able to do with a healthy team. I remember Nicholas Sundstrom, who was a key player on the second line, broke his arm on a slash from John McClain. And they had a number of other key injuries. So with a healthy team, maybe they could have given the Flyers a bit of a better run in that series, and perhaps would have even won the series and gone on to face the Red Wings in the final.
I'm assuming you were calling Gretzky's last game. What was that like? A very emotional time there in the Garden.
So interesting story. I was not at the last game because I was working a Fox NHL game at the time. Fox had the NHL rights, and there were 3 or 4 regional games every day. And the number one crew, Doc Emmerich and John Davidson, called that Ranger game against the Penguins on, I think it was April 18th, 1999. I was in Boston. I was in Philadelphia. They played the Bruins. So it was a Flyers-Bruins game. However, I did make it back. I drove back after the game, and there was a party. The Rangers and MSG threw a party at Windows on the World, atop the World Trade Center, the Twin Towers. And it was the only time I was ever up there in April of 99. And I still have some pictures and great memories. My wife was pregnant at the time. My daughter was born. My older daughter is 21, born in October of 99. And we have a picture, myself, my wife, who was pregnant, and Wayne Gretzky.
Amazing.
At that party after his last game. And I remember the Penguins team showed up, and Mario Lemieux was there, and Jaromir Jagr. And I heard later on, the reason the Penguins were at the party is there was an issue with their plane. So they never left for the airport from the Garden. They had a bit of a delay, so they wound up coming to the party. And there were just so many Hall of Famers and luminaries from around the NHL. And although looking back, would have loved to have been at the game. I actually missed Wayne's last 2 games. I had another assignment when the Rangers played in Ottawa, the last road game of the season, his last game in Canada. But was very lucky to be able to make it back for that party after my game in Philadelphia that day.
Excellent. So you mentioned the NHL on Fox. Previously, you did a season with ESPN, and you did the games there. And you're at this point. You were in the mid '90s. You start doing national work. You're also doing NFL on Fox after your days with Wagner College. You're doing the pro games here. At that point, where you're starting to get pretty busy in all these different avenues, I'm always curious how you went about juggling these jobs in the sense of, hey, New York Rangers radio, I can't work this date and this date and this date because I got to be here, or hey, I can't do this game for NHL on Fox because I have to, do this game for MSG. How did that work out for you?
Well, you use the term juggle, and that's exactly right. It's like a jigsaw puzzle, juggling all the events. And I'm just so very fortunate to work for great bosses at MSG, at Fox, at NBC with the NHL and NBC work that I've done for the last 10 years or so in the Olympics. MSG has been great to many of us through the years. Myself, Mike Breen, who's the voice of the NBA, Sam Rosen, who worked Fox football for many, many years, and some others as well. They're great about allowing us to miss a certain number of games for the national assignments. And, we all thank them often for allowing us to do that. Football usually takes precedence on weekends during the fall, so I do miss a lot of the Ranger games, and Don LaGreca does a great job filling in. But everything kind of fits together like a jigsaw puzzle, like you said. MSG slides me over for about 20 games a year on the Knicks side on television when Mike Breen has a national assignment. But other than that, it's the NFL and Fox games, Rangers radio, some Knicks TV, the NHL and NBC, and it all does kind of fit together like a jigsaw puzzle. Right before we started this interview, I've been mapping out the schedule, and it's a little different this year because we won't be traveling for away games with the Knicks and Rangers. We'll be doing those games out of a studio, but have just been mapping out what the schedule is going to look like beginning next week. I have a Knicks game on January 6th, and then the first Rangers game on January 14th.
Yeah, and it just, you start doing baseball as well. It's great. You're in there at Fox. They're expanding their network as far as sports. And in 2009, you worked 4 sports in 4 days. What was that like for you? And like, oh my gosh, I'm doing this. I go back, got to travel here. I'm working every sport 4 days in a row. How was that like, if you remember that time period?
That was a lot of fun. It was a football game in Pittsburgh. The baseball game, I wasn't doing play-by-play. I was hosting the interviews in the locker room after the game. Yankees had beaten the Angels in the ALCS. So it was a football game in the afternoon in Pittsburgh, the baseball interviews at night, a Rangers game the next night, and then a Knicks game 2 days later down in Miami. I've had a number of instances, usually in October, during normal times, of course, where either 3 or 4 sports collide. I did some boxing a couple of years ago, so I think I had a 15-day stretch with 5 sports in October of 2019, adding boxing to the mix as well. But it's a lot of fun. You have to be really organized. I get a lot of work done on planes and in hotel rooms and in cars. So that aspect of it isn't affected too much. And to me, those times of the year are the most exciting, the most fun. It's been kind of strange. It's been bizarre for all of us since the middle of March, but it's really been one sport at a time. I was in the Edmonton bubble in the summer, working over 30 hockey games during that time. And then the NFL season, the last 15 or 16 weekends, and then it ends this Sunday, and then moving on to hockey with some basketball sprinkled in as well. But to get back to the original question, October 2009 and some of the recent Octobers are a lot of fun. I had a football basketball doubleheader recently when I worked the Giants Arizona game 2 weeks ago, and then worked the Knicks away game out of the studio, a preseason game at MSG against the Pistons. So those days were a lot of fun and certainly memorable.
So you do all 4 major sports, and that's a claim that nobody else can make as religiously as you do. And what I think is interesting is every sport is a little different, obviously. Every type of personality is very different. People that you work with are different. Production is very different. I think in terms of structuring how you prepare for certain games and how you prepare for broadcasts, I think everybody's different. Nick and I we had Lance Meadow from Sirius on the podcast.
NYU grad.
That's right. We've had Ian McEnany recently. He was really great too. Gave us a totally different perspective. But all of them tend to have different methodologies between methodologies rather in terms of how they prepare for certain games and stuff. So how do you prepare for each game differently? Do you have more notes for one particular sport more than any other sport? Do you find yourself doing interviews with players and talking to other colleagues for certain broadcasts? What's the difference primarily between like local broadcasts and national broadcasts with the people that you work with? Because I mean, obviously you do a lot, and there's got to be some differences between most of them.
That's a great set of questions, Joe. You mentioned that I do all four sports, and I'm real lucky. I think, the only one presently that's involved in all four. There have been many others, though, through the years. I know there's a list out there. There have been about 10 or 15 play-by-play broadcasters dating back to the 40s and 50s who have done all four, but not necessarily concurrently at the same time. For example, Bob Wischusen, who works for ESPN and does a great job. I know he's done all four. Sean McDonough. So there are others who have done it, but not necessarily simultaneously. As far as the preparation, I sort of have a checklist that I go through for every game, no matter what the sport is. And it includes watching prior games played by both teams. It involves a lot of reading, catching up on each team over the last 5, 6, 7 days, depending on what sport it is, preparing charts and going through statistics and materials provided by the team and by the league and other stuff that you could find over the internet. I love the preparation aspect of it. The football preparation definitely takes the most time because I don't work with one team specifically. I could have two teams on week 17 that I haven't done all season. So you really have to catch up on their entire year. Football obviously has the biggest rosters with over 50 players on each side. So football tends to take the most time. You wind up watching their previous games. Sometimes you go back 2 games. With basketball and hockey, I'm around the Rangers, the Knicks all the time. So I'm obviously keeping up with both teams, doing a lot of reading during normal times, going to practices, talking to coaches, going to press conferences. These days, a lot of that's being done on Zoom. So my philosophy on the preparation for all the sports is the same, but the amount of time that it takes for football versus the other sports is certainly even more time consuming. But to me, it never feels like work. It's fun work preparing for broadcasts. I feel like I'm very lucky, even though there's a lot of work and travel during normal times that goes into my job. I never feel like I'm actually going to work.
No doubt about it.
Charts and stuff. Because we had Lance Meadow on it, and he answered this question pretty specifically.
See, Joe, he's showing his charts.
This is the early preparation for the Seattle Seahawks and San Francisco 49ers this week. I had the Seahawks 2 weeks ago, so it's within reach. I'll show you what the final chart looked like. And during the week, and I'll probably go through this much information if I printed it all out. By the time Sunday hits, I don't want that much in front of me. So I'll have my chart for that specific game. And I'm old school. I still do most of it by hand, even though I use the computer and the iPad for a lot of the research. I feel like I remember things a lot better if I write it down myself using different colors. So this is the Seahawks Washington game from 2 weeks ago. I'll hold it up.
Wow.
Nice.
Look at that.
So that's the Seattle offense. This is the Washington defense. Vice versa on the other side. And then I have another sheet with various information and notes from the meetings with the players and coaches on Zoom this year. So that's really all I have in front of me by the time Sunday hits, these 2 sheets. For hockey, I have a similar sheet that I use, which is this size, 2-sided, where I put the line combinations, fill in player stats and other information. Similar setup for basketball and baseball. So that's the football sheet from a couple of weeks ago.
And I would assume basketball and baseball probably the easiest for you to spot players, right? You don't have to do you have a spotter for NFL? Like how are you going like, oh, number 77, and then you look at your roster.
So yes, basketball would be the easiest as far as spotting players. Baseball, obviously there's only one pitcher, one batter at a time. You do have to remember who's who in the field, obviously, or base runners. With hockey, I get asked all the time if hockey is the toughest sport to call. To me personally, it's the easiest. I've done it for 30 years. Hard to believe. people always ask about the line changes, changing on the fly, the foreign names and pronunciations. To me, it's like riding a bike. You just get used to it. You know, you guys are able to pronounce the names of all the hockey players, I'm sure. Once you hear it once or twice, 3 times, it kind of rolls off the tongue. So to me, hockey is the easiest. Basketball is similar, probably even easier because there are fewer players on the court and it's moving a little slower. Football is the most rhythmic. It's one play and then it's 20 or 30 seconds. It's one play and then it's 20 or 30 seconds. Baseball to me is the most challenging because I only do 10 or 12 games a year. And you really have to have a solid color commentator because there's not a lot going on between pitches. So to me, hockey's actually the easiest. A lot of people find that hard to believe, but personally, that's my answer, and I'm sticking to it.
So, Kenny, have you done any Giannis Antetokounmpo games yet, or Tua Tagovailoa?
I have. I had Tua's first start with the Dolphins, and I have to admit, I did write it out phonetically, and I taped it up to the monitor just in case, because it is a little bit of a tongue twister. Tungo Vailoa, and for those of us old enough to remember Frank Viola, the pitcher with the Twins and the Mets, that would kind of creep into your mind. I wanted to make sure I didn't say Tungo Viola. Wanted to make sure that Tungo Vailoa. Don't think I ever messed it up. I've had Antetokounmpo on a number of occasions with the Knicks playing the Bucks. That one I feel like is pretty easy once you get used to it. My first Olympics back in 2002, one of the first games I worked was a women's hockey game between the U.S. and China. So you can imagine what it was like, getting those names straight. The good thing was the U.S. dominated the game, so China hardly ever had the puck. So on TV, we didn't have to identify too many of their players constantly because they didn't really have the puck. And their goalie was nicknamed the Great Wall, and she was incredible. She made about 70 saves in the game, so we referred to her most of the time as the Great Wall.
That's amazing, the Great Wall of China, and that's one of the best nicknames I've heard. We're going to get into the Olympic stuff, but first I want to touch on 2014. Obviously, the Rangers make the run to the Cup. Exciting time, but you must have been exhausted. You're doing Rangers, and then the next day you're flying to the West Coast to do TV for the Western Conference Finals, but then back to the East Coast for Rangers. What was that, 14-day period like for you?
It was crazy. It was probably the most unbelievable, travel, back-to-back games, West Coast to East Coast that I've ever had during that 2-week stretch. Never felt tired. I think the adrenaline really carried me through. Only missed, if you want to call it that, one of the games. It was a scheduled miss. Didn't work the first Rangers Montreal game because I had to be in Anaheim for an afternoon game the next day. So that would not have worked logistically. But I wound up working 5 of the Rangers Canadiens games and all 7. I said Anaheim, but it was LA. It was the Kings and Blackhawks. I was confusing it with the next season when the Ducks played the Blackhawks. So it was great. It was so much fun. The Ranger series on the radio side. And I actually spoke last night on the phone with the only player who scored a goal in Game 6, Dominic Moore, in the 1-0 victory over Montreal. Lundqvist was unbelievable. And the LA-Chicago series was tremendous as well. The Kings wound up winning on the overtime goal in Chicago by Alec Martinez in Game 7. And, of course, it was Martinez who would score I see Joe shaking his head, the overtime goal in the Cup final as well in Game 5, but we don't have to dwell on that one too much.
No, we don't want to relive some bad memories there. But Lundqvist was incredible there, and hopefully Lundqvist recovers fully, and we can see him back out on the ice. So you touched on the Olympics. Obviously, you are with NBC now doing hockey, but you're also the Olympics. Now, the Winter Olympics for you, I'm sure when you're approached to go do hockey, that you're like, okay, hockey, no problem. But I'm interested to hear your thought process when they told you, hey, do you want to do track and field for the Summer Olympics? And obviously you're not keeping up with track and field throughout the year or for the 4-year cycle. So what does your preparation work like for that?
Well, first of all, the hockey is so much fun. I've been involved in 5 Olympics from 2002 on, and the NHL players were at the first 4, and of course not in Pyeongchang, but also called the women's gold medal game, which is one of my top memories in my career in 2018 when the U.S. beat Canada. So that's a lot of fun, a lot of teams, a lot of preparation, but you're in one place, one hotel. So that helps a little bit. You're not moving around, but oftentimes 2 games a day, sometimes 3. But doing track and field in 2016, it was a lot of fun. It was definitely challenging. It was a sport that I wasn't too familiar with. I hadn't ever worked track and field before. I said earlier, hockey is like riding a bike. I could probably say the same thing about basketball, baseball, and football at this point after all these years. With track and field, that was certainly not the case. Had great people around me, an analyst named Tim Hutchings from Great Britain, who did a tremendous job guiding me along and assisting me. So it was a lot of fun. A lot of work went into it, but have some great memories from the track and field venue in Rio, and my family came with me. So just fond memories from the 2016 Olympics.
Yeah, and oddly enough, I think when you were in Sochi, it was warmer. I remember you taking pictures in the Red Sea. That must have been crazy.
Sochi was pretty warm. It was about 60 degrees there. And Pyeongchang was a little cooler than Sochi, but did spend some time we had an outdoor pool and jacuzzi at the hotel. So some of us braved the elements and went outside and did actually go swimming in South Korea, believe it or not. But Sochi, yes, was despite the fact that it was the Winter Olympics, it was about 60 degrees while we were there that February.
Wow, that's wild. Do you know if you're going to be doing anything in 2021 Summer Olympics?
Not sure what the plan is yet. I think I'd love to. Hopefully I'll be involved, but not sure exactly what the plan is for 2021 at this point, with the Olympics being pushed back.
Right.
Now hockey could also run into July. So not sure logistically what's going to happen as of this point, but I'll be sure to let you guys know.
Yeah, let us know. We had Pierre Maguire, your colleague, on a few episodes ago, and he said he was set to do water polo again, but
right.
Obviously, I don't know if they're going to allow the broadcasters into the stadiums or into the country. Quite honestly, with the pandemic. But what I always enjoyed about NBC is we have such great broadcasters, and you guys have your core sports, but then for the Olympics, you're able to adapt. Pierre and Doc, they did water polo. You're doing track. Al Trotwig is doing gymnastics, which is just incredible. And we had Mary Carrillo on with us, who, of course, she's kind of like a late night host or does her features. And she said, "Hey, I really only know tennis, but NBC gives the faith in all of us to just kind of go ahead and do what we got to do to get these games, covered." What is the process like there when it's an Olympic year and you got to transition from your core duties to switching over to the Olympics? You kind of touched it with track and field, but just want to know in general like how NBC handles that each
right.
cycle.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. I've always loved the variety of sports, and I've enjoyed watching Pierre and Doc on the water polo. I actually went to a water polo match in Brazil, and I saw Pierre from across the way. He was in the opposite corner, and he does a great job. He tackles it like hockey, really, and he's so into it and enthusiastic, and he's always been a favorite to work with, and I've enjoyed Mary Carrillo's work on some of the other sports. So it's a lot of fun, and I've enjoyed being involved in, like I said, in 6 Olympics now, 5 on the hockey side, track and field in 2016. But the variety to me has made it so enjoyable throughout the years, and received, like I said, the opportunity with Cox Cable to do so many sports and kind of use that as a springboard. My goal was always to do hockey on the radio. That was my number one goal coming out of college. And then when I worked out in Washington, had the opportunity also to do the other sports with HTS on the TV side. So just very lucky, very fortunate. And as I said, never feel like I've got to work a day in my life.
So now there are rumblings, and we'll see what happens when the National Hockey League renegotiates and reforms the collective bargaining agreement. So the NHL players did not play in the 2018 games, but before that, they played in 2014. Great memories of the United States with TJ Oshie. 2010 in Vancouver. You mentioned you called the women's gold medal game before. That United States-Canada gold medal game is up there among one of the greatest games, I think, of all time in any sport, in any context, any scenario. Sidney Crosby, the goal still hurts, but one of the all-time great moments. But so the Olympics, it's about creating moments, and I think the players, whether they will basically mention this in interviews or not, I think they take great pride in that. I think anybody would take great pride in that. I think there's kind of this undercurrent where they do want to play. Do you have any kind of inkling of which way the league is going to go in? Does NBC kind of chime in with that decision? Is NBC kind of pushing the league to say, hey, listen, the players want to play. Our ratings for these games were significantly higher than they were in 2018. And not that Russia and Germany did not have a great gold medal game, but obviously the games with the players are much more exciting. And that's something that Nick and I really, really enjoy. So what is your sense? Which way do you think that they're leaning? Do you think the league is going to allow it? Do you think they're going to approve it in the new CBA? Do you think NBC is going to put the pressure on the league to do so?
Well, I'm pretty sure that was a big part of the CBA negotiations, if I remember correctly, from what I read over the summer. So I think the players want to go. I would think the networks want the players to go. So I hope so. I don't think it's definitive 100%, but I've always been a fan since they started allowing pros in the Olympics of the NHL going. And I've been a part of it, like I said, in 2006, 2002, 6, 10, and 14. So from a personal standpoint, I hope so. I hope the players do go because we've seen what the hockey's like at the highest level. You mentioned the Crosby goal after Parisi tied the game in 2010, the Oshie shootout against Russia. I wasn't working either of those games, but I was at both. I was in the building for both. So those are great memories as well. So I hope so. Hopefully in 2022, the NHL players are there and, it makes for just tremendous hockey.
And you mentioned, the color analyst plays a lot into, how you feel comfortable and whatnot with the different sports. Something I'm always going to remember is just the iconic team of Kenny, Moose, and Goose. I mean, that was just the most dynamic trio. I don't know if we're ever going to see a silent reporter quite like, the Goose ever again. But what was it like working with him?
It was so much fun. We were together for 8 years, myself with Moose and Goose. And we worked 5 playoff games, divisional games. We worked a Pro Bowl one year. Just fantastic memories. It was such a fun crew to be around. We were together really from Friday morning until Sunday night every week for 17 or 18 or 19 straight weeks, depending on the season. And, Goose liked to have fun. He wasn't all about work. And I think that's a good thing. I think when you get to know your crew and your coworkers, the camaraderie is a big part of it. And we did some things that I had never done before and I've never done since. We went on a jet boat in Niagara Falls one Saturday morning. We got soaked. We had a Bills game in Buffalo. In Louisiana, we had a Saints game. We went on a swamp boat tour and touched little alligators. We went to the Charlotte Motor Speedway. Some of us rode as the passenger in a NASCAR vehicle driven around the track 140 miles per hour. Others, including Goose, actually drove the car himself, which was incredible just to see him get in through the window. There were no doors and he had to get in first through the window and get his head in there and then put the helmet on. So it was a lot of fun. There's so many memories, both of the broadcasts and some of the off the field stuff that we got to do with that group. So great memories. And like I said, 5 playoff games, including New Orleans, San Francisco in 2012, battling back and forth, Drew Brees and Alex Smith, 4 touchdowns in the last 4 minutes. It was one of the most memorable NFL games that I've ever been a part of.
And then the 49ers ceremoniously lost to the Giants, who beat the Patriots for the second Super Bowl. Shout out to Tom Coughlin and Eli Manning. So you talked about things you've never done before. So I'm going to bring you to this year, what the NHL was able to accomplish by constructing a plan to put bubbles in both Toronto and Edmonton, and to be able to keep the players there, to basically orchestrate the playoff plan that they wanted to do. And this was at the height of the pandemic, right? This was coming out of the spring into the summer. There were a lot of things that were still uncertain. But we talked about this with Pierre. And we wanted to talk to you because obviously you were there. You are most certainly a part of that great accomplishment. I think it's a really, really huge accomplishment what the leagues were able to do under the circumstances with everything going on in the world in this pandemic. So what I wanted to ask you was, naturally, it's very different. You mentioned before that you're doing, play-by-play stuff from studios now in different remote rooms as opposed to traveling. But during that time period where emotions were remarkably high, tensions were high, not seeing your family as much, being tasked with this obligation to do so. How do you feel like you guys did? Nick and I think you did an outstanding job, but so how was that difficult for you, not seeing your family as much? Was there anything different that you did for the bubble that you wouldn't necessarily normally do for a normal broadcast? And overall, how do you think it went?
I think it went great. I thought the league, the network, the arenas, the cities of Edmonton and Toronto did a fabulous job setting up the whole thing, keeping everybody safe and healthy. I loved it. It was great. I was there for 37 days. I felt like I was so lucky to be one of the only people in the building watching these tremendous playoff games, right through the Western Conference final. And, we were tested every day. First 4 days, I was in quarantine in my hotel room. They came to me to test me, as they did with everybody over the first 4 days. And then for the next 33 days, I worked games almost every day, in many cases 2, in some cases 3. And we were tested every day, still wore the mask and kept, at a distance from everybody else. But we were able to have meals together. Pierre and I had many meals, whether in the hotel or at the arena, spent a lot of time together. But it was tremendous. Just, you hate to say it because of the reasons we were there, but it was really a once in a lifetime experience to call that many playoff games in an empty building. As far as being away from my family, I think FaceTime helps, being able to see them every day, Zooms, obviously. And to be honest, prior to my 37 days at Edmonton, I was home for 146 straight days, which was unprecedented. So I think they were ready to get rid of me at that point. I think, they didn't mind me having to leave back in early August. It was 146 days in a row at home, which never happened. So we spent some great quality time together, family time, and were able to FaceTime just about every day while I was gone. And there were many others who were there a lot longer than I was. There were people who were there from the league and from some of the teams for 50, 60, even 70 days. So I was gone for 37.
And then the next day you're out of the bubble and you're doing NFL basically. So, and it's different this year with you, different broadcast crew for a little bit. So how do you build that chemistry when you end up working with a new partner?
It's been a little different trying to build the chemistry this year. Jonathan Vilma, who's done a terrific job, Shannon Spakes, our sideline reporter, but we're not spending a lot of that time together like we normally would. We've had Zooms every week with our production crew, with the producer and director and some of the other folks. We have a Wednesday Zoom every week for about an hour where we throw ideas around and get to know each other a little better. But we haven't had those Friday dinners, Saturday lunches, time together at team facilities like we normally would in the past. So it's been a little different as far as building up the chemistry, but I think Jonathan's done a great job. We had a Cowboys Eagles big game the other day, and I thought he was fantastic. And we finish up with Seattle and San Francisco in Glendale, Arizona, 49ers home game this Sunday. So looking forward to next year, hopefully, when we can spend a lot more time together and get to know each other, because I think that's such a big part of working with a crew is the camaraderie, getting to know each other away from the game, away from the broadcast booth, which I enjoyed with Moose and Goose for all those years and with Rondé Barber for the last 3 years as well.
Yeah, I always enjoyed when we get an NBC national game for hockey, and it's you and Joe McLuddy. It's like watching a home broadcast. And
Joe's one of the best, one of my favorite people, and he does a tremendous job.
So you worked with so many different analysts. I really love those few times you did with Rondé and Tiki Barber. I thought that was really cool.
Those were
but
fun.
Who, pick the sport, doesn't matter. Who are some people you think that currently aren't analysts that you think would make a good analyst and you'd like to potentially work with them down the road? Because you never know in this industry who might end up being an analyst that's a current player or somebody that recently retired.
Right. That's a great question. And I might hold the record. I've worked with over 225 analysts in the various sports, many of them for only one game and others for, 50, 100, hundreds of games. Dave Maloney and I have probably worked over 1,000 games together on Rangers radio, hundreds of games with Joe Micheletti. But as far as players who aren't doing it yet, who might still be playing, that's a great question. I haven't gotten that one before. I think in football, Matt Ryan's a guy that I've always felt whenever we met with him prior to games, I think he would do a terrific job. I think either of the Manning brothers, Peyton's been rumored to become an analyst, at various times. And, Eli was sort of more of a reserved, quiet guy, but I've heard stories that within the locker room, with his teammates, he was hilarious and a big practical joker. So I think he would actually do a great job. Now, these guys don't really have to work for a living anymore. They made so much money. So it's really a personal preference as to whether they want to travel every weekend and put in all the time during the week, or just enjoy their life and their family at this point. In hockey, I mentioned Dominic Moore earlier, and he might have the opportunity to do some broadcast work. So I think he'd be really good. Such a smart guy, and has the perspective of playing for many different NHL teams. I think he played for 10 different teams. So I think he would do an excellent job. But I kind of have to sit down and think about it as far as guys in other sports.
All right.
I've worked baseball with AJ Przinsky, who has made a great transition from the field to the broadcast booth. And I've worked with so many others, like I said, in the various sports who all do a terrific job.
Yeah, some guys that came to mind, Greg Olson, he'll be doing games with Fox real soon.
I worked
as
a
soon
game
as
with
he
Greg
retired.
last year. Yeah,
Yep. Greg is
Olson
awesome.
outstanding.
He was great in the
Really
XFL as well. And I thought that was really good.
Giants Arizona game with him last year. He was terrific.
I think a guy, if he ever wanted to be broadcasting, maybe as an analyst, maybe not in booth, Steve Weatherford, I think would be tremendous with his personality. Hockey, I don't know why nobody's ever tried to get Sean Avery to. Maybe he's too dangerous though, but I think he'd be.
I enjoy his Instagram stories. I don't know
Yes.
if you guys have seen those, but he's very entertaining.
Thinking about some Knicks, and the way you put it in perspective was great. How the upper tier players, they don't really need to do this job. So Landry Fields and Jeremy Lin, I think they would be two guys. I think Jeremy Lin would be great for the business. First Asian basketball commentator would be pretty big. And then in baseball, I think we're going to see Todd Frazier once he retires. He could be on air. And I think someone is probably going to sign Brody Van Wagenen to do something, because you don't really see that perspective of a former agent plus general manager in one. So we'll see if he.
Those are all great thoughts. Good ideas.
You know who I think would be a really good person for the Rangers? Derek Stepan. Every time I see him, he's just very, very sociable. He always creates great extra content. Even after the trade from to the Coyotes, he does stuff with the locker room. He was recently just traded to the Senators a couple of days ago. He's somebody who has a very, very strong connection to New York. Obviously, his Game 7 goal in the second round against Washington. That's one of Doc's greatest calls, very, very easily. Everybody always remembers that. I think he's got very, very strong ties to the organization. I can't see somebody like Henrik Lundqvist, and again, like Nick said, hopefully he gets real better real soon with that heart issue. But he doesn't strike me as somebody who's like going to do on-air stuff. He strikes me as somebody who's going to be more like behind the scenes, maybe like a coach, maybe like a mentor, maybe somebody who's working in the front office, seeing things hands-on, firsthand. But I think Stepan would be really great for the Rangers too.
Yeah, Henrik's a really thoughtful, bright guy. Great interview. But you're right. I could see him potentially working for the organization. I know he's already alluded to it. Helping out with the goalies and working in the front office. I think on the current team, Tony D'Angelo, I think definitely has a future in broadcast. He already does a podcast, and
does a podcast.
Yeah, the Watch Your Tone podcast. If you haven't checked it out, does a great job with that. But he follows all sports. He's like an encyclopedia, whether it's baseball, football, basketball, hockey. He's really into all sports, and I could definitely see Tony working in the media someday. And he already is with his podcast.
Yeah, I think another guy that might be good, the Rangers, is Brian Boyle. I always used to love his post interviews.
Brian Boyle is great.
And I don't know if you were working this game, but I got to ask you, because it was a very famous Ranger moment. The game where the Rangers play the Devils at MSG, and you get the 3-on-3 fight at the puck drop. Were you there? Pierre said Pierre was in the middle of that. He said it was like nothing he's ever seen before. What was it like?
Stu Bickle took the opening faceoff. Dave and I called that one from the upper press box. It was during the renovation, so we were all the way upstairs that year. That was definitely a memorable moment as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And what is it like calling a fight, though? I mean, obviously you've done boxing, but calling a hockey fight, how do you, and especially when there's multiple fights going on, how are you focusing? Are you just watching the monitor in that sense to see what's coming up on the screen for the viewers, or how do you call that?
I mean, fortunately, we don't see too much of it anymore. I'm not a big proponent of fighting in hockey, but you have to state the facts, especially on radio where the listeners can't see what's going on. You have to explain what's happening. You guys may have seen it on YouTube. You were probably a little bit young, but I was working for Fox, the Dan Cloutier fight with Tommy Salo, Ranger Islander game in 98. I think it was in 1998. Probably one of the more memorable hockey fights that I've witnessed. And that one's out there on YouTube if you haven't ever seen it.
So in addition to fights, what were your favorite moments that you were doing on broadcast that you, in the moment you realize like this is going to be an all-time or this is going to be something that's remembered for a really long time, or even something that you just found like super enjoyable, maybe to you, maybe not to others. So what were your favorite moments through the years?
Well, some of the big moments, obviously the Rangers winning the Cup in '94. I was working for NHL radio at the time. The run to the 2014 final, so many memorable moments during that stretch. The women's gold medal game in 2018, I mentioned earlier in South Korea. The Jose Bautista home run I called in 2015, yes. The Blue Jays, Texas Rangers game, worked that one. And then I have
bat flip.
The bat flip, exactly. I have some other moments. I had the game when Terrell Owens stomped on the star in Dallas at Texas Stadium.
Yeah.
I had the Victor Cruz 99-yard touchdown catch, which we mentioned earlier. I had Michael Vick as a rookie scoring on this incredible 43-yard, I think it was, touchdown run in Minnesota, where he wound up going up through the tunnel in overtime, won the game. And I could probably list many others, but those are the big ones that come to mind.
Yeah, those definitely stand out. I remember the Vic run. The Vic run was excellent. So changing gears here, I wanted to ask you, obviously everybody's always going to want to ask you about your father and your uncles. And this is something that you've wanted to do since you were a kid. And a lot of people say, oh, I've always wanted to do this since I was young, but you wanted to do this since you were 5 years old, right? And you were born into it, you were bred into it. One of my favorite parts of the Fox broadcast that I always enjoy listening to is whenever Joe Buck mentions his father and the stories that he used to tell. And it was very, very prominent when the Cardinals made the World Series in 2011 and the whole timeless, like, we'll see you tomorrow night call. That really became something that was not just his father's call, but his call as well. And he shares those moments with us. And he's obviously had a lot of great moments with his dad. You are very, very blessed because not everybody can call the great Marv Albert their father. And obviously your uncle has also worked in sports as well. So I wanted to ask you the impact that your family has had on you through the years. They were there for you, obviously, to motivate you to continue, help you churn through this. What are some of the best advice that you have gotten from your dad and your uncles? How often do you speak to them? Do you speak to them on a daily basis? Do you speak to them on a weekly, monthly basis, whatever it is? Is there anything that you do during your broadcast that one of them will catch and will kind of flag and kind of relay back to you and say, hey, Kenny, we really, really like your call here, but you did something over here, is there anything that comes, across your way like that? And I'm sure that they must be great. And hopefully they were really an inspiration to you as much as they were to us and watching, your father be able to call games and Nick and I be able to listen to him call games through the years.
Yeah, absolutely. I could not have asked for better teachers. I learned so much just via osmosis, by watching and listening and being around. I always joke that when we had family dinners back in the day, when my uncles would come over on holidays or other special occasions, it was like listening to the first all sports radio station, because they would sit around the table telling stories. Al and Steve were both voices of the Nets and the Islanders and the Devils, and Steve did the Mets and the Jets at different points. He's also on that list, by the way. Steve's done all four sports at various times. But it was great just being able to tag along and go to games and really learn about the preparation and about what goes into it and the entire business. So I was probably pretty quiet back then. I might not have asked a lot of questions, but I probably learned more by listening and watching. And as far as advice, I would say in my early years when I was doing minor league hockey and then the Capitals, back 90 through 95, I would send some of the tapes home and ask for advice. But, these days, certainly talk to my father at least once a week, and we text back and forth all the time. And, he'll still check out some of the games, and, we'll pass along certain pointers here and there. But, and as far as my uncles, they're both living back in the New York area, and we'll email and text. Don't get to see them too often during normal times due to our crazy schedules. And, of course, now most people aren't seeing others too frequently. But again, could not have asked for better teachers. And some of my great memories are tagging along and going to games with really all of them throughout my childhood.
And is there anybody else you've encountered through your years in broadcasting? Could be your time starting in Washington, your time with the Rangers, your time working with NBC, your time working with Fox, maybe any other sports you've done like baseball and basketball. Is there anybody else that really stands out to you that was really instrumental in your success and the kind of life you've been able to live?
Well, I have to mention Howie Rose, Doc Emmerich, and Sam Rosen, who I've known all of them for such a long time, and they're all very close friends. And we've been colleagues now for the last 25 or 30 years, but I got to meet them all at a young age. And I was actually Howie's associate producer for Mets Extra in the early days of WFAN. I never actually worked at WFAN, but I worked with Howie for 3 summers at the home games at Shea Stadium. And we would sit there and watch the game. He would do the pregame show, and I would help arranging guests and helping with the phone callers. And then on the post game, I would go down to the Mets clubhouse and hand a headset to the player of the game, Darryl Strawberry, Doc Gooden, Keith Hernandez, whoever it might have been. And then I'd sit there with Howie until midnight in an empty Shea Stadium. So Howie was certainly a big influence early on. Doc and Sam, also great friends, traveling with the Rangers. I've been sitting next to Sam on the plane for 24 years now. So I'd have to mention those 3 guys for sure. But also,
outstanding.
Joe Buck's been a colleague at Fox for 27 years now. Don't see him very often. We see each other once a year at the Fox football seminar prior to the season, but he's a big hockey fan, so he'll always text during big St. Louis Blues games if I'm working and he's watching. Love watching guys like Al Michaels and Mike Tirico and Ian Eagle and Mike Breen and so many of the others. But the guys, that I'd really have to mention from a young age were the hockey guys, Howie, Sam, and Doc Emmerich.
Yeah, I think you should be Doc's replacement. I think you would really, really excel in that role. And I think Howie should replace Kenny for NBC. So hopefully we can make those suggestions to you. You could relay those suggestions back to them, and hopefully we can make something happen there. But Kenny, I am so excited. We were so excited that you decided to do this with us. We are huge fans, obviously huge Rangers fans, but huge sports fans in general. Really, really great following that you have now, including us. This was a lot of fun. We really, really enjoyed having you on. We hope that you, your father, your uncles, your wife, your children, we hope you enjoyed the holidays. We hope you have a very happy, healthy, safe, prosperous new year. Hopefully everything kind of resumes normalcy within the next couple of months. Hopefully you'll be able to get back to your normal schedule, your normal routine, which will include all the normal traveling that you usually do. We hope to have you on again real soon. Thank you again for coming on. What we do here with our listeners, we give our guests the last words. If there's anything else they want to share, if there's anything else that they want to promote, the floor is all yours. Once again, Kenny, thank you. We really, really appreciate this. We really would like to have you on again if you'd like to come on again, but the floor is all yours.
Well, guys, great questions. Really enjoyed it. Nick and Joe, love to come on again anytime. And again, to all the listeners and viewers and to you guys and your families, stay safe, stay healthy. Hopefully 2021 is a lot better than 2020 for all of us. Look forward to hockey starting up in a couple of weeks, the NHL season getting underway. And again, terrific questions, really enjoyed it. And have a lot more stories to tell if you want to have me on in the future. So look forward to that as well. But stay safe, happy new year, and hope to chat with you guys again soon.
I appreciate it, Kenny. We'll have you back on. We'll do an all Staten Island sports connection episode because who knew you had such great ties to the great island of Staten Island? We appreciated those stories and we appreciate your openness and just sharing all the stories. And we really thank you for your time here. So that's going to do it for this episode of You Know I'm Right. For our very special guest, Kenny Albert, and for my co-host, Joe Calabrese, I'm Nick Durst, and this has been You Know I'm Right.